Sarah Henderson stood alone at the altar, her white dress a stark reminder of dreams shattered. At 42, she'd heard the whispers. Too old, they said, too set in her ways. When her fiancé didn't show, those whispers became reality. Now, her rental car kicks up dust on a lonely Montana road, each mile putting distance between her and humiliation. She hasn't cried. Not yet. The sun beats down on an unfamiliar landscape when her car sputters to a stop near a weathered ranch gate. Inside that ranch house sits James Cooper, a man who hasn't opened his heart since losing his wife 5 years ago. Neither knows that this unexpected breakdown will change everything. She's just looking for directions. He's just offering coffee. But sometimes, life's greatest gifts come disguised as accidents. Could this be the moment that proves it's never too late for love to find its way home? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The ivory wedding dress lay crumpled in the back seat of the rental car, each wrinkle a testament to Sarah Henderson's haste to escape. She'd changed into jeans and a comfortable blouse at a rest stop 2 hours ago, scrubbing away the carefully applied makeup that had taken her sister Amy 3 hours to perfect that morning. The woman in the rest stop mirror had looked older without it, every one of her 42 years evident in the fine lines around her eyes. She hadn't minded them until today, until Richard's mother had loudly whispered about them during the wedding rehearsal. The leather-bound journal in her purse held everything she'd planned to say during the reception. 22 years in publishing had taught her the power of words, how to shape them, how to make them dance. But there would be no reception, no speech about second chances and mature love. The pages now felt like a mockery. Montana stretched endlessly before her, vast and indifferent to her pain. She'd chosen this direction randomly, pointing her rental car north and west, as far from Boston's sympathetic whispers as possible. Her phone had buzzed incessantly for the first 100 miles. Amy, her mother, even her assistant Rebecca, until Sarah had finally turned it off. The dashboard clock read 4:47 p.m. when the first drop of rain hit her windshield. The sky ahead had turned the color of bruised plums, and her gas gauge hovered just above empty. According to the last sign she'd passed, the nearest town was still 30 miles away. "You're a competent woman," she muttered to herself, words her father had repeated throughout her childhood. She'd built Henderson Publishing from a small family business into a respected house for contemporary literature. She'd navigated corporate boardrooms and literary festivals. She'd even learned to sleep alone again after David, her first husband, died 12 years ago. But somehow, she'd failed to see this coming. Richard's increasing distance over the past month, his mother's not-so-subtle hints about freezing eggs, and adoption, the way he'd looked at his young assistant during the company Christmas party. All the signs had been there, written in a language she should have recognized. The engine coughed once, twice, and then the car began to lose power. Sarah guided it to the side of the road, her hands steady on the wheel even as her heart raced. The rain was falling in earnest now, drawing a grey curtain across the Montana landscape. Through it, she could make out the shape of a gate, weathered wood and iron, speaking of age and permanence. She sat there for a long moment, listening to the rain drum against the roof. The journal in her purse seemed to mock her with its silence. 22 years of building a life, of proving herself in a male-dominated industry, of carefully constructing walls around her heart after David. And what did she have to show for it? A failed wedding, a rental car out of gas, and a white dress that now felt more like a shroud than a symbol of hope. A flash of movement caught her eye, a figure on horseback, emerging from the curtain of rain. The rider sat tall in the saddle, at home in this wild landscape, in a way that made Sarah acutely aware of her own displacement. As the horse and rider drew closer, she could make out more details. A weathered Stetson, broad shoulders, and a face that spoke of years lived under open skies. The horse stopped beside her car, and the rider touched the brim of his hat in a gesture that seemed to belong to another era. "Car trouble, ma'am." His voice was deep, colored by the kind of quiet confidence that comes from solitude rather than arrogance. Sarah rolled down her window, rain misting her face. "Out of gas, I think, and lost if I'm being honest." The admission cost her something. She'd spent so many years being the one with the answers. The man studied her for a moment, his eyes the same grey as the storm clouds above. "James Cooper," he said finally. "My ranch house is just up the drive. We can call for help from there." He paused, taking in her city clothes and the crumpled wedding dress visible in the back seat. Something flickered across his face. Recognition, perhaps, of a story he wasn't yet ready to hear. The old Sarah, the one from this morning, still believing in the power of carefully laid plans, would have politely declined, would have insisted on handling things herself, but that Sarah had been left behind at an empty altar, along with her illusions about control and timing. "Thank you," she said instead, gathering her purse and the small overnight bag she'd packed for what was supposed to be the first night of her honeymoon. "I'm Sarah Henderson." The rain continued to fall, washing away the dust of her journey, as James Cooper extended a weathered hand to help her onto his horse. And somewhere in the gathering dusk, fate, or whatever name you gave to life's unexpected turns, began to write a new chapter in the leather-bound journal of her life. The horse's steady gait carried them through the rain, Sarah holding tight to the saddle horn, while James Cooper guided them along a winding dirt road. Her wool blazer, hardly suited for Montana weather, was soaked through, but she barely noticed the cold. There was something oddly comforting about the warmth of the horse beneath her, the solid presence of the stranger behind her, and the rhythmic sound of hooves against wet earth. "Watch your head," James warned as they approached a covered bridge. The structure looked like something from a forgotten time, its weathered beams telling stories of countless seasons. Inside, the hollow echo of horseshoes against wood competed with the drumming rain on the roof. Sarah caught a glimpse of a coffee-stained map, tacked to one of the bridge's support beams, its corners curled with age and moisture. "That's my working map," James offered, following her gaze. "Helps me keep track of the fence lines, water sources, good grazing spots. 5,000 acres can hide a lot of secrets if you're not paying attention." The casual mention of the ranch's size made Sarah's publishing empire feel suddenly small and abstract. Here, success was measured in acres and rainfall, in the health of cattle and the strength of fences. She found herself wondering what stories this land could tell, what wisdom it had gathered over generations. They emerged from the bridge into a clearing where the ranch house stood proud against the darkening sky. It wasn't the rustic cabin Sarah had expected, nor was it the gaudy mansion some wealthy city dweller might build as a country retreat. Instead, it was a thoughtfully constructed two-story home with a deep wraparound porch and large windows that glowed with warm light. "Martha!" James called out as they approached, and a border collie appeared from beneath the porch, her tail wagging in welcome despite the rain. "Best cattle dog in 3 counties, he explained, helping Sarah dismount. Her legs felt unsteady after the ride, and his hand lingered on her elbow a moment longer than necessary, steadying her. Inside, the house was a study in comfortable simplicity. Hardwood floors showed paths worn by years of boot steps. A stone fireplace dominated one wall of the living room, its mantel holding a few photographs and what looked like military medals in a shadow box. The furniture was well made and well used, each piece telling its own story of life lived fully. "Let me get you something dry to wear," James said, disappearing up a narrow staircase. Sarah stood dripping on the entry rug, taking in details that spoke volumes about the man who lived here. A bookshelf filled with agricultural journals and classic literature. A pair of reading glasses next to an open book on the coffee table. A guitar in the corner that showed signs of regular use. He returned with a flannel shirt and a pair of jeans that he explained had belonged to his sister during her last visit. "Bathroom's down that hall," he said, gesturing. "I'll make some coffee and call Mike at the gas station, though in this weather It might be a while before he can get out here. The bathroom mirror revealed a woman Sarah hardly recognized. Her carefully styled hair had collapsed in the rain, and her mascara had left faint shadows beneath her eyes. But there was something else, too, a wildness, a freedom she hadn't seen in her reflection for years. She changed quickly, rolling up the sleeves and pant legs of clothes that weren't quite her size, but felt somehow right for this moment. When she emerged, the smell of coffee filled the house, and James was hanging up an old wall phone in the kitchen. "Mike can't make it out until morning," he said, turning to face her. He paused, something shifting in his expression as he took in her transformed appearance. "The coffee's ready if you'd like some." Sarah accepted the offered mug, wrapping her hands around its warmth. The kitchen, like the rest of the house, spoke of a life lived intentionally. Copper pots hung from a rack, their surfaces mellowed by years of use. A rack of well-maintained knives suggested someone who took cooking seriously. Through the window above the sink, she could see the rain beginning to ease, the last light of day painting the clouds in shades of purple and gold. "I suppose I owe you an explanation," she said finally, her fingers tracing the rim of the mug. James shook his head, leaning against the counter with his own coffee. "You don't owe me anything. Sometimes life takes unexpected turns, and we end up exactly where we need to be, even if we don't know it at the time." The simplicity of his words, delivered without judgment or expectation, made something shift inside Sarah's chest. She looked down at the coffee-stained map he'd spread on the kitchen table, its creases and annotations telling the story of a life lived in harmony with the land. In Boston, she had been defined by her accomplishments, her failures, her relationships. Here, in this kitchen with its honest warmth and the sound of rain on the roof, she was simply Sarah, a woman who had lost her way and found herself on a stranger's doorstep. Martha, the border collie, padded into the kitchen and laid her head on Sarah's knee, offering the uncomplicated comfort that only animals can provide. Outside, the storm continued its retreat across the Montana sky, leaving behind a silence that felt like the space between heartbeats, a pause pregnant with possibilities. Neither of them was ready to name. James reached up to a high shelf and brought down an antique copper coffee pot, its surface bearing the patina of generations. "My grandmother's," he explained, handling it with the reverence usually reserved for sacred things. "She always said, 'Coffee tastes better when it carries memories.'" Sarah watched as he worked with practiced movements, measuring fresh grounds into the pot. There was something mesmerizing about his efficiency, the way he moved through his kitchen with the same sure-footed confidence he'd shown on horseback. "Published any good books lately?" he asked, surprising her. At her questioning look, he gestured toward the living room. "Saw your name on that novel I'm reading, Henderson Publishing. Didn't make the connection until just now." "You read contemporary literature?" The words came out more surprised than she'd intended. A smile touched the corners of his mouth, softening the weathered lines of his face. "Ranching takes up the days, but nights get long out here. Books keep good company." He poured the coffee into fresh mugs, the rich aroma filling the space between them. "Though I admit I'm partial to your classics collection. The new editions with the original woodcut illustrations? That was your doing, wasn't it?" Sarah felt a warm flush of pride. That project had been her personal passion, fought for in countless boardroom meetings. "Most people thought I was crazy to invest in physical books when everyone was going digital. Most people don't understand the value of holding something real in their hands." James settled into a chair at the kitchen table, gesturing for her to join him. The antique coffee pot sat between them like a silent guardian of their conversation. "Is that why you stay out here?" she asked, curious about this man who could quote literature but chose to live so far from the world she knew. The reality of it? He considered the question, taking a thoughtful sip of coffee. "Partly city life. I tried it after my wife passed. Everything there feels like a performance. Out here, the land doesn't care about your credentials or your bank account. It responds to work, to patience, to understanding." The mention of his wife hung in the air between them. Sarah recognized the careful way he'd said it, the same tone she used when speaking of David. How long ago? 5 years this October. He traced a pattern on the wooden table with his finger. Cancer. Fast and fierce, like everything else about her. Rebecca never did anything halfway. Sarah nodded, understanding more than words could express. 12 years for me. David, my first husband, heart attack at 35. No warning, no goodbye. Just a regular Tuesday morning that turned out to be anything but regular. The coffee in their mugs had cooled, but neither moved to refresh it. Outside, the last light was fading from the sky, and the first stars were becoming visible through the kitchen window. Martha dozed at their feet, occasionally sighing in her sleep. "And today's groom?" James asked quietly, not pushing, just opening the door if she wanted to walk through it. Sarah's fingers found the handle of her mug, needing something to hold on to. "Richard, a widower I met at a literary festival 2 years ago. He said all the right things, understood the right silences, until he didn't." She paused, surprised by how much less it hurt to say it out loud here, in this warm kitchen with its honest coffee and understanding silence. His note said I was too set in my ways, that at 42 I was too old to give him the family he wanted. James made a sound that might have been anger on her behalf, but his voice remained gentle. Some people mistake age for certainty, experience for rigidity. They don't understand that real strength comes from knowing who you are. And, "Who am I, James Cooper?" The question slipped out before she could catch it, surprising them both. He looked at her then, really looked at her, his grey eyes holding something that made her heart skip. "You're a woman who built something meaningful from words and paper, who loved deeply enough to survive loss, who had the courage to drive away from a false promise toward an unknown horizon." He stood, picking up their empty mugs. "And right now, you're someone who looks like she could use another cup of coffee." The antique coffee pot gleamed in the soft kitchen light as he refilled their mugs, its well-worn surface reflecting the warm glow of the overhead lamp. Sarah watched his movements, aware of a growing sense of peace she hadn't expected to find here, in this kitchen, with this quiet man who read her books and understood the language of loss. When he sat back down, they let the silence stretch between them, comfortable as an old quilt. The coffee's warmth seeped into their hands, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to the rising moon. It was a moment that should have felt strange. Two people who were strangers this morning sharing coffee and confidences in the gathering dark. Instead, it felt like turning the page to find exactly the words you didn't know you needed. The rain had cleared by the time they stepped onto the porch, leaving behind a freshly washed world, touched by the golden light of late afternoon. A gentle breeze carried the scent of wet sage and prairie grass, so different from the manufactured fragrances of Sarah's urban life. "Would you like to meet Thunder?" James asked, nodding toward the stable. "He's been watching us through the window for the past hour, probably feeling neglected." They walked together across the muddy yard, their boots leaving parallel tracks. In the damp earth, the stable was an old but well-maintained structure, its weathered boards speaking of decades of careful stewardship. Inside, the air was warm and sweet with the smell of hay and horses. Thunder, a magnificent dark bay quarter horse with a white star on his forehead, nickered softly at their approach. He was older, Sarah could tell, but his eyes were bright and intelligent as he watched them enter his stall. "He was my father's horse," James explained, running a gentle hand along Thunder's neck. "Retired now, but he still likes to supervise everything that happens on the ranch." He reached into his pocket and pulled out an apple, offering it to Sarah. "He's particular about who he takes treats from." Sarah held out the apple, palm flat, as she'd learned during childhood riding lessons. Thunder's velvet lips tickled her hand as he accepted the offering, and something warm bloomed in her chest when the horse then lowered his head, inviting her touch. "Well, would you look at that?" James said softly. "Took him 3 months to warm up to Rebecca." The words held no bitterness, just a quiet observation that seemed to shift something in the air between them. Thunder nudged Sarah's shoulder with his nose, leaving a damp spot on the borrowed flannel shirt. She laughed, the sound surprising her with its naturalness. When was the last time she'd laughed like that, free from the consciousness of being watched, judged, measured? "Want to walk down to the creek?" James asked. "The light's perfect this time of day." They left Thunder with another pat and headed toward a well-worn path that wound through a grove of cottonwoods. Martha bounded ahead of them, occasionally circling back as if to ensure they were following the right way. "The land's been in my family for 4 generations, James said as they walked. "My great-grandfather homesteaded here in 1889, built that. A bridge we crossed earlier with his own hands." He paused, looking out over the rolling landscape. "Every spring I find arrowheads in the fields, reminder that others knew this land long before us." The creek came into view, its waters swollen with rain, but running clear over smooth stones. They stopped at a bend where a fallen log provided a natural seat, the setting sun painting the water in shades of amber and gold. "In the city," Sarah said, watching the play of light on water, "everything's about what's next. Next quarter's projections, next year's releases, next relationship milestone. Out here, it feels like time moves differently." James nodded, understanding. In his eyes, land teaches you to see time differently. A single season is just a breath in the life of these hills. Makes your own troubles seem smaller somehow. A great blue heron landed upstream, its movements deliberate and graceful as it searched the shallows. They watched in companionable silence as the bird worked its way along the bank, each step a study in patience. "I should be devastated," Sarah said finally, voicing the thought that had been nagging at her. "My fiancé left me at the altar this morning. I should be crying, calling my friends, drinking wine, and swearing off men forever." She turned to look at James. "Instead, I'm sitting by a creek in borrowed clothes, watching a heron fish and feeling more at peace than I have in years." "Maybe," James suggested quietly, "you're exactly where you need to be." The words hung between them, simple but profound. Sarah felt something shift inside her, like pieces of a puzzle slowly finding their proper alignment. The heron took flight, its wings casting long shadows across the water, and she watched it disappear around the bend. The sun was touching the horizon now, setting the clouds ablaze with color. Thunder's distant whinny floated down from the stable, a reminder of the world beyond their quiet moment by the creek. But neither of them moved to leave, content to watch the day's light fade and the first stars emerge in the deepening blue above. Back at the house, James paused in the kitchen doorway. "You should probably call your sister," he said gently. "Let her know you're safe." He gestured to the landline on the wall. "Cell service is spotty out here, but the old phone works fine." "I'll give you some privacy." Sarah nodded, grateful for his thoughtfulness. As he disappeared upstairs, she dialed Amy's number, bracing herself for the flood of questions she knew would come. "Sarah? Oh my God, where are you? We've been worried." "Sick!" Amy's voice crackled through the line, thick with concern. "I'm safe," Sarah assured her, eyes wandering to a worn, leather-bound book on the counter. "My car ran out of gas in Montana. I'm staying at a ranch until it can be fixed in the morning." There was a pause. "Montana? Sarah, that's... Are you sure? You're okay?" "Actually, yes." Sarah surprised herself with the certainty in her voice. "I really am." After promising to call again in the morning and deflecting Amy's offers to fly out and get her, Sarah hung up. Her attention returned to the book on the counter, a recipe book, she realized, opening it carefully. The pages were yellowed with age, filled with handwritten recipes and notes in different hands. Margin notes spoke of family gatherings, special occasions, memories preserved in measurements and cooking times. "That was my mother's," James said, returning to the kitchen. "And her mother's before that." He moved beside her, gently turning to a page marked with a faded ribbon. Rebecca added some recipes too. She loved to cook. Sarah's finger traced a note in elegant handwriting. James loves this on cold nights. The recipe was for beef stew with homemade dumplings. Do you still cook from it? Not as often as I should. He looked at the book thoughtfully. Sometimes memories need time to season before they can feed you again. Sarah understood completely. It had taken her 3 years after David's death before she could make his favorite pasta dish again. Well, she said, surprising herself, would you like some help making dinner? It's the least I can do to thank you for the rescue. James studied her for a moment, then smiled. I think there's everything we need for this stew. If you don't mind cooking with a rancher who's better with cattle than carrots. They worked together in comfortable synchronicity, the recipe book propped open between them. James knew his kitchen well, reaching for pots and ingredients with easy familiarity. Sarah found herself relaxing into the rhythm of chopping vegetables while he browned the meat, their movements a kind of dance in the confined space. My grandmother used to say you could tell everything you needed to know about a person by how they handle a knife in the kitchen, James commented, watching her efficient dicing of an onion. Sarah laughed. And what does my knife work tell you? That you're precise, patient. He paused, adding with a slight smile, not afraid of tears. The double meaning hung in the air between them, acknowledged but not heavy. Sarah added the onions to the pot, watching them sizzle. And what does your cooking? Tell me about you. That I'm a work in progress, he replied, measuring herbs with careful hands, learning to adapt old recipes for a table that's usually set for one. The honesty in his voice touched something in Sarah. She thought of her own dining room table, in Boston, elegantly set for dinner parties, but rarely used for quiet meals at home. Sometimes, she said, the best recipes are the ones we create as we go along. James nodded, adding the last ingredients to the pot. As the stew began to simmer, filling the kitchen with warm, homey scents, he reached up to a high shelf and brought down a bottle of wine. Found this in town last month. Been waiting for the right occasion to open it. Sarah watched as he poured. 2 glasses, thinking about timing and chance, and how life sometimes takes you exactly where you need to be, even when you think you're lost. The recipe book lay open between them, its pages holding generations of stories, making room for one more. The stew simmered on the stove, while James lit a fire in the living room hearth, its warmth pushing back against the evening chill. Sarah sat on the comfortable leather sofa, wineglass in hand, watching as he reached for a worn photo album from the bookshelf. Seems fair you should know who you're having dinner with, he said, settling beside her. The album's cover was well-handled leather, its pages thick with memories. The first photo showed a younger James in military dress blues, standing straight-backed and serious. Army Rangers, he explained. 2 tours in Afghanistan. Came home. Indo 5, when my father's health started failing. He turned the page to a shot of a much younger version of himself on horseback, maybe 12 or 13, grinning widely despite a missing front tooth. Your father took this one? Sarah asked, noting the joy in the boy's expression. Mom, actually. She loved photography, documented everything. His finger traced the edge of the photo. Lost her when I was 16. Dad kept her cameras, but never used them. Said some moments weren't meant to be captured, just remembered. Sarah understood that sentiment all too well. After David died, she'd found dozens of unfinished notes on his phone, random thoughts he'd wanted to share with her later. She still couldn't bring herself to delete them. The next pages showed James and Rebecca's story in photographs. Their wedding day on the ranch, Rebecca in a simple white dress that caught the Montana wind, the 2 of them working cattle together. Quiet moments on the porch. She had been beautiful, Sarah thought. But more than that, she'd looked completely at home in this life. She was a local girl, James said softly. Grew up on a ranch 30 miles from here. Understood this life, its rhythms and demands. He paused at a photo of Rebecca with Thunder, both of them seemingly caught mid-laugh. When she got sick, she made me promise not to let the grief turn me into a stranger to myself. Sarah reached for the album, her fingers brushing his as she turned to the next page. "Did you keep that promise?" "Most days." He smiled slightly. "Some days are harder than others." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the distant bubbling of the stew. Sarah thought about the promises she'd made to David, about the ones Richard had made to her just yesterday. "Can I show you something?" she asked, reaching for her purse. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through to find a particular photo. "This was David, my first husband." James looked at the image of a young man with kind eyes and an easy smile, his arm around a younger Sarah, at what appeared to be a publishing event. "He looks like he knew how to light up a room." "He did." Sarah smiled at the memory. "He was a high school English teacher. Used to say that between us, we were keeping literature alive at both ends of the spectrum." She locked the phone, setting it aside. "After he died, I threw myself into work, expanded the publishing house, moved into new markets. Anything to keep moving forward." "And Richard?" James asked gently. Sarah took a thoughtful sip of wine. "Richard was safe, predictable, a widower who understood grief, or so I thought." She shook her head. "Maybe I was trying too hard to write a happy ending." "Sometimes the best stories are the ones that write themselves," James said, closing the photo album and setting it on the coffee table. From the kitchen, a timer chimed. "Sounds like dinner's ready." They moved to the kitchen, where James ladled the stew into bowls, while Sarah sliced the fresh bread they'd picked up from his bread box. The recipe book still lay open on the counter, its pages holding generations of shared meals and conversations, just like this one. As they settled at the kitchen table, Martha curled up hopefully at their feet. The everyday domesticity of the scene struck Sarah with unexpected force. Here she was, sharing a home-cooked meal with a man she'd met just hours ago, yet it felt more genuine than any of the carefully orchestrated dinner dates she'd had with Richard over the past 2 years. "This is good," she said, tasting the stew. "Your grandmother would be proud." James smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. "Pretty sure she'd say it needs more pepper." He reached for the pepper mill, offering it to her first. "She always said a meal shared is a story told." Sarah added a bit of pepper to her stew, thinking about stories, the ones we plan to write and the ones that seem to write themselves. Outside, the Montana night pressed against the windows, full of stars and possibilities neither of them had expected to find today. After dinner, James excused himself briefly to check on the horses one last time before nightfall. In the barn's familiar solitude, he reached into his shirt pocket, withdrawing a small velvet box that had lived there, unopened, for the past 5 years. Inside nestled his grandmother's engagement ring, a simple diamond set in yellow gold, worn smooth by 3 generations of Cooper women. Rebecca had worn it proudly, understanding its significance, not just as a symbol of their love, but as a connection to this land, this life. After her death, he'd tucked it away, believing some chapters of life were meant to stay closed. Thunder nickered softly from his stall, drawing James's attention. "What do you think, old friend?" he murmured, running a hand along the horses. "Knack, am I crazy to even be thinking about this?" The horse bumped his shoulder gently, as if offering wordless encouragement. James smiled, remembering how Thunder had taken to Sarah immediately. The old horse had always been a good judge of character. Back in the house, he found Sarah standing by the living room window, silhouetted against the dark glass. She'd borrowed one of his heavy cardigans against the evening chill, and something about seeing her wrapped in his clothes made his heart twist in a way he'd forgotten it could. "The stars are amazing out here," she said as he approached. "In Boston, you're lucky if you can see a handful through the light pollution. One of the best things about Montana nights," he agreed, standing beside her. "My father used to say that stars are just stories waiting to be told." Sarah turned to face him, her expression thoughtful. "Your family has a way with words for ranchers. Had to do something during those long winter nights." He smiled, then gestured to the window. "Seat." Best view in the house, if you'd like to stay a while. They settled into the cushioned nook, their shoulders not quite touching. Outside, the moon had risen, casting silver light across the ranch's rolling pastures. The ring box felt heavy in James's pocket, a weight of possibility he hadn't expected to carry again. "You know," Sarah said softly, "I should be panicking right now, making calls to cancel the honeymoon reservations, dealing with returned wedding gifts, facing all the sympathetic messages." She drew his cardigan closer around her shoulders. "Instead, I'm sitting here watching stars with a stranger, feeling more myself than I have in years." "Are we still strangers?" James asked, his voice quiet in the darkness. She turned to look at him, moonlight catching in her hair. "No, I suppose we're not." The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken possibilities. James thought about timing, about the strange ways life sometimes offered second chances. His hand moved unconsciously to his pocket, touching the velvet box. "I keep thinking about what you said earlier," he ventured, "about being too set in your ways, about being too old for new beginnings." "Richard's words, not mine," she corrected gently. "Thing is," James continued, choosing his words carefully, "out here, we measure things differently. Age isn't about years. It's about what those years have taught you, about knowing who you are and what matters." Sarah's hand found his in the darkness, her fingers cool against his palm. "And what matters to you, James Cooper?" He looked down at their joined hands, thinking about the ring in his pocket, about timing and trust, and the courage it takes to open closed doors. "Authenticity," he said finally, "living true to yourself and your word, building something real, something that lasts. Like this ranch? Like this moment?" Outside, an owl called into the night, its voice carrying across the quiet land. Martha stirred from her place by the fireplace, padding over to rest her head on Sarah's knee. The dog's presence completed the picture in a way that made James's chest ache with possibility. "You know," Sarah said, her voice thoughtful, "in publishing, we talk about narrative arcs, how every story needs the right pacing, the right sequence of events." She paused, absently stroking Martha's head. "But sometimes the best stories are the ones that break all the rules." James thought about the ring that had graced the hands of Cooper women for generations, about how his grandmother had received it after knowing his grandfather for just 2 days. Sometimes, when something was right, time became a different kind of measure. "Sarah," he began, then stopped, suddenly uncertain how to bridge the gap between what he was feeling and what reason said was sensible. She squeezed his hand gently. "Sometimes," she said, as if reading his thoughts, "the hardest part of a new chapter is letting yourself turn the page." The velvet box seemed to pulse in his pocket like a second heartbeat. Outside, the stars continued their ancient dance across the Montana sky, witnesses to countless stories of love and loss, endings and beginnings. James Cooper, who had always prided himself on careful deliberation, found himself standing at the edge of something that defied careful planning. Martha looked up at them both, her wise eyes moving between their faces as if she already knew what tomorrow would bring. In the distance, thunder's soft nickering floated up from the barn, a reminder that some decisions were better made by heart than by head. Sleep proved elusive for both of them that night. Sarah lay in the guest room, surrounded by handmade quilts that smelled of lavender and sunshine, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch at night. The old porch swing creaked rhythmically. In the night breeze, a sound both melancholy and soothing. After an hour of watching moonlight patterns dance across the ceiling, she slipped from bed, pulling James's cardigan over her borrowed pajamas. The hardwood floors were cool beneath her feet as she made her way downstairs, drawn to the welcoming darkness of the porch. She found James already there, seated on the porch swing that had been calling to her. He'd built a small fire in the outdoor hearth, its gentle light pushing back against the Montana night. Without a word, he shifted to make room for her on the swing. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked, settling beside him. "Too many thoughts," he admitted, his voice quiet in the darkness. Been sitting here remembering something my grandfather used to say about this swing. What's that? He claimed he proposed to my grandmother right here, said the rhythm of the swing helped find the rhythm of the words. He paused, the swing moving gently beneath them. Course, Grandma always said it happened by the creek. They never did agree on the details, but they both knew it was right. Sarah smiled, drawing her feet up beneath her. How long had they known each other? 2 days. James's voice held a note of wonder. Met at a harvest dance in town. Story goes he took one look at her and told his brother, "That's the woman I'm going to marry." And she said yes? Just like that? She said she knew his heart before she knew his favorite color. The swing creaked softly as they rocked. Different times, I suppose. Sarah thought about that, about timing and certainty. Maybe not so different, she said carefully. Maybe we just convince ourselves we need more time because we're afraid to trust what we feel. The fire crackled, sending sparks up to dance with the stars. James turned to look at her, his expression thoughtful in the firelight. What do you feel, Sarah Henderson? She met his gaze, finding courage in the quiet strength she saw there. Like I've been editing other people's stories for so long, I forgot I could write my own. His hand found hers on the swing between them, warm and certain. And what kind of story would you write? One that breaks all the rules, she said softly. One that starts with a broken-down car and a stranger's kindness. One where timing doesn't matter as much as truth. The porch swing moved in its ancient rhythm, carrying them through this moment of shared honesty. Above them, the stars wheeled. In their eternal dance, witnesses to countless conversations, just like this one, and yet entirely unique. You know, James said after a while, Thunder's never taken to anyone the way he took to you today. That old horse has seen more truth than most people I know. Sarah laughed softly. Is that your way of saying your horse approves of me? That's my way of saying sometimes the heart knows before the head catches up. He squeezed her hand gently. Sometimes life brings you exactly what you need, exactly when you need it, even if it's not what you thought you were looking for. The fire had burned low, but neither moved to add more wood. The night held them in its gentle embrace, the porch swing continuing its slow dance, each creak like the turning of a page in a story writing itself. James? Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. I'm glad my car broke down here. He turned to her, moonlight catching the silver in his hair. I'm glad you were brave enough to stay. The porch swing creaked its ancient lullaby, keeping time with their hearts. Martha appeared silently from the darkness to lay at their feet, completing the picture of domestic peace. In the distance, an owl called once, twice, its voice carrying across the sleeping ranch like a blessing. They sat together in the comfortable silence, watching the fire fade to embers, both aware that something profound had shifted in the rhythm of their separate lives. The night drew its gentle veil around them, keeper of secrets and witness to new beginnings. Dawn arrived with the soft clarity that only mountain mornings know, painting the kitchen in shades of pearl and gold. James stood at the old cast-iron stove, preparing a breakfast that would have made his grandmother proud. Fresh coffee percolated in her antique pot, its aroma mingling with the scent of sizzling bacon and homemade biscuits warming in the oven. The sunrise breakfast spread before him was more elaborate than his usual morning fare of coffee and toast. He'd risen early, unable to sleep after their conversation on the porch, and found himself pulling out ingredients he hadn't touched in years. His grandmother's biscuit recipe, written in her flowing hand on a yellowed index card, had come back. To him, like muscle memory. Sarah appeared in the doorway, her hair loose around her shoulders, still wearing his cardigan. She paused, taking in the scene before her, the table set for two, morning light streaming through windows that faced the eastern hills. Something smelled too good to sleep through, she said, moving to the coffee pot. Their fingers brushed. As she accepted the mug he offered, a touch that felt both casual and significant. Thought you might be hungry. He pulled the biscuits from the oven, their golden brown tops perfect as a picture. Ranch breakfast, my grandmother's recipe. Your grandmother seems to have had a recipe for everything, Sarah observed, settling. At the table, she believed food was a way of saying things words couldn't. He placed a biscuit on her plate, steam rising like a promise. She'd have liked you. Sarah broke open the biscuit, letting its warmth rise to her face. Because I appreciate. Recipes? Because you understand the power of words, but know when silence says more. He joined her at the table, their knees almost touching beneath its worn surface. Through the window, they could see Thunder and Martha making their morning rounds. Of the property, an odd but companionable pair. They ate in comfortable silence, the kind that feels like conversation. The coffee cups between them, his dark blue, hers cream-colored with a chip in the rim, seemed to belong together on the weathered table. Morning light caught the steam rising from them, turning it to gold. The mechanic should be here soon, James said finally, though his tone held a question. Sarah nodded, her fingers tracing the chip in her cup's rim. Back to reality, I suppose. But she made no move to go upstairs and pack her overnight bag. You know, James said carefully, reality is what we make it. He reached across the table, his hand covering hers. Sarah, The phone's ring cut. Through the moment, like a knife through butter. James answered it, his expression shifting as he listened. I see. Yes, I understand. Thank you, Mike. He hung up and turned back to Sarah. The mechanic's truck broke down. Won't be able to make it out until tomorrow morning. Their eyes met across the table, and something like relief passed between them. The breakfast spread, his grandmother's. Biscuits, the 2 coffee cups, the morning light painting everything in shades of possibility, suddenly felt less like an ending and more like a beginning. Well, Sarah said, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth, I suppose I'll have to impose on your hospitality for another day. Suppose you will. James refilled their coffee cups, his movements unhurried. Though there's something I've been meaning to show you. Up in the north pasture, there's a spot where the wildflowers bloom even this late in the season. Thought we might ride up there if you're interested. Sarah looked down at their hands, still joined on the table. I'd like that. Outside, the morning had bloomed into full glory, the kind of day that seems to hold every possibility within its hours. Thunder nickered from his paddock as if approving their plans. Martha sat in the doorway, her tail thumping against the floor in a steady rhythm. James stood, reluctantly releasing Sarah's hand to clear the breakfast dishes. She rose to help him, and they worked together in a dance that felt centuries old, passing plates, wiping counters, storing leftovers. The morning light caught the simple gold band on his left hand, and Sarah noticed he touched it briefly, almost unconsciously, before slipping it into his pocket. Some thresholds, once crossed, can never be uncrossed. As they prepared for their ride, both felt the weight of unspoken words, of possibilities as vast as the Montana sky spreading above them. The breakfast dishes dried in the rack, 2 coffee cups side by side, telling their own quiet story of sharing and possibility. They rode together through the morning, Thunder carrying Sarah while James rode a younger bay named Scout. 2 coffee thermoses hung from their saddles, swaying gently with each step. The familiar weight of his grandmother's ring in James's pocket seemed to pulse with each hoofbeat, like a second heartbeat keeping time with his own. Sarah sat easily in the saddle, her borrowed jeans and flannel shirt making her look as if she belonged here. She'd pulled her hair back in a simple braid, and the morning sun caught its silver threads, turning them to starlight. James found himself watching her as she took in the landscape, her publisher's eye noting details he'd long since stopped. Seeing, look at those clouds, she said, pointing to where massive white formations rolled across the Montana sky. In Boston, the buildings block most of the view, but here, she trailed off, words failing to capture the majesty of the open space. My father used to say Montana writes its own story in the sky, James offered, guiding Scout alongside Thunder. Every day a new chapter. Sarah smiled, understanding. Your family has quite a way with metaphors for ranchers. Comes from all those winter nights reading classics by lamplight. He returned her smile, then nodded toward a rise ahead. "There's what I wanted to show you." They crested the hill, and Sarah's breath caught audibly. Before them stretched a meadow painted with late-season wildflowers, purple lupine, yellow blanket flower, and the deep blue of mountain cornflowers. The morning dew still clung to their petals, turning each bloom into a constellation of diamonds. They dismounted, leaving the horses ground-tied to graze. James pulled a well-worn blanket from his saddlebag and spread it on a dry patch of grass. 2 tin cups emerged next, their surfaces bearing the patina of countless morning coffees shared in quiet places. "These were my parents' cups," he explained, pouring coffee from the thermoses. "Dad always said coffee tastes better when you can see forever while you drink it." Sarah accepted her cup, wrapping her hands around its warmth. He was right. She looked out over the meadow, then back at James. "Your whole family seems to have understood something essential about life, about taking time to see what matters." James watched as she lifted the cup to her lips, noticed how naturally she held it, as if she'd been drinking from his family's cups all her life. "Sometimes," he said carefully, "it takes losing something to understand what truly matters." She nodded, understanding in her eyes. "And sometimes it takes walking away from the wrong thing to find the right one." The morning breeze carried the scent of wildflowers and sage, mingling with the steam from their coffee. Thunder and Scout grazed contentedly nearby, their occasional soft nickering the only sound besides the wind in the grass. "You know," Sarah said after a while, "I should be terrified right now. By all logical measures, this is crazy. I'm sitting in a wildflower meadow with a man I met yesterday, drinking coffee from his family's cups, feeling more at home than I ever did in my own living room." She turned to face him fully. "But I'm not terrified at all." James set his cup down, its familiar weight suddenly less important than the weight of this moment. "What are you feeling?" "Like I've been editing other people's stories for so long. I forgot that sometimes the best stories write themselves." She smiled, a tender expression that reached her eyes. "Like maybe some endings are really beginnings in disguise." The ring in James's pocket seemed to warm against his chest, as if responding to her words. He thought about his grandparents, about their 2-day courtship that had led to 50 years of shared sunrises, about Rebecca, who had taught him that love could survive even death, about Sarah, who had arrived on his doorstep like an answer to a question he hadn't known he was asking. Thunder lifted his head from grazing, his wise eyes seeming to watch them with ancient understanding. The old horse had always known things before James did, had known Rebecca was sick before the doctors confirmed it, had known Sarah was special from the first moment she touched his nose. "Sarah," James began, his hand moving to his pocket where the ring waited, but she placed her fingers gently against his lips, stopping his words. "Sometimes," she said softly, "the heart knows before the words do." The tin cups sat between them on the blanket, their surfaces reflecting the morning light like mirrors reflecting truth. Above them, the Montana sky continued its eternal story, writing promises in clouds and sunlight. And in that moment, surrounded by wildflowers and witnessed by 2 patient horses, both Sarah and James knew with absolute certainty what the next chapter would bring. James stood, offering Sarah his hand. "Walk with me." The morning sun had warmed the wildflowers, releasing their sweet fragrance into the air. They moved together through the meadow, their boots leaving parallel tracks in the morning dew, bent down occasionally, gathering select blooms as they walked, purple lupine for courage, yellow blanket flower for joy, mountain cornflowers for faith. Sarah watched him work, understanding that each choice was deliberate, each flower part of the story he was preparing to tell. When they reached a natural clearing where the meadow offered a view of the entire valley, James stopped. The impromptu bouquet in his hand had become something beautiful in its wildness, much like the journey that had brought them here. "My grandmother used to say that Montana wildflowers are like love," he began, his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. They grow where they choose, not where you plan. They're stronger than they look, and they come back year after year, even when the winters are harsh. Sarah's eyes met his, understanding dawning in their depths. Your grandmother was a wise woman. She was. James looked down at the flowers in his hand, then back at Sarah. She gave me something else too, something I've been carrying for a while, waiting for the right moment, or maybe the right person. He reached into his pocket and withdrew the velvet box that had rested there since yesterday. The morning light caught its worn surface, evidence of the generations of love it had witnessed. "Sarah Henderson," he said softly, "I know this isn't conventional. By any normal measure, we should take months to get to know each other, to date, to follow all the expected steps." He opened the box, revealing the simple diamond ring that had graced the hands of Cooper women for 3 generations. But I learned a long time ago that love doesn't always follow conventional paths. Sarah's breath caught as she looked at a ring, understanding its significance. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached out to touch the worn velvet of the box. "This was my grandmother's ring," James continued. "She received it after knowing my grandfather for just 2 days. They were married for 50 years. He paused, gathering his thoughts. "Rebecca wore it too, and she taught me that love is both stronger and more fragile than we imagine, that every day together is a gift." He took the ring from its box, holding it in his palm like a promise. "I'm a rancher, Sarah. I believe in reading the signs nature gives us, in trusting what's real. And what I feel with you, what we've found here, it's the most real thing I've known since I lost Rebecca." Thunder nickered softly from where he grazed, as if offering his approval. The morning breeze carried the scent of wildflowers and possibility. "I can't offer you penthouses or publishing galas," James said, his voice rich with emotion, "but I can offer you sunrises that paint the sky like poetry, nights where the stars write their own stories, a life that's authentic, if not always easy." He held out the ring, along with the wildflower bouquet. "I can offer you my heart, this land, and the promise that every day I'll choose you just as deliberately as I chose these flowers." Sarah looked at the offerings in his hands, the wild beauty of the flowers, the generations of love represented. In that simple ring, her publisher's mind, trained to edit and analyze, fell silent before the pure truth of this moment. "In Boston," she said carefully, "I spent years trying to fit myself into someone else's story." She touched one of the lupine blooms gently. "But here, in less than 2 days, I found myself writing a new one, a better one." She met his eyes, and in them she saw the same certainty she felt in her own heart. Yes, James Cooper. Yes to the sunrises and the stars. Yes to the authentic life. Yes to writing this story together. His hands were steady as he slipped the ring onto her finger, though his eyes shone with emotion. It fit as if it had been made for her, the gold warm against her skin. The wildflowers in her other hand seemed to glow in the morning light, their beauty made more precious by their fleeting nature. "My grandmother would say this was meant to be," James said softly, drawing her close. Sarah smiled, thinking of the broken-down car that had brought her here, of all the seemingly random choices that had led to this perfect moment. Maybe she's right. Maybe some stories write themselves, and our job is just to be brave enough to let them. They stood together in the meadow, surrounded by wildflowers and witnessed by the ancient Montana sky. Thunder and Scout grazed peacefully nearby, unimpressed by the magnitude of the moment they had just witnessed. The morning sun caught the diamond on Sarah's finger, sending prisms of light dancing across their joined hands. In that moment, with the valley spread before them and their future unfolding like a fresh page, both Sarah and James understood that some love stories don't need time to prove their truth. Sometimes, like wildflowers in the Montana spring, they simply bloom, when and where they're meant to, defying convention but following a deeper wisdom. Back at the ranch house, Sarah's phone lay on the kitchen counter like a harbor before a storm. She turned it on to find 37 missed calls, dozens of text messages, and what seemed like endless notifications from well-meaning friends, offering comfort about her failed wedding. The device seemed out of place here, a piece of her old life intruding into this new reality. James stood behind her, one hand resting supportively on her shoulder. "Ready?" She touched the ring on her finger, drawing strength from its solid presence. "As I'll ever be." She picked up the phone and dialed Amy's number, putting it on speaker so James could hear. "Sarah? Oh my God, where have you been? Mom's been worried sick." Amy's voice filled the kitchen, bringing with it echoes of Boston, of board meetings, and deadlines and carefully planned lives. "I'm still in Montana," Sarah said, her voice steady, "at the ranch, and Amy, I'm getting married." The silence that followed was so complete they could hear Martha's tail thumping against the floor. "You're—" "What?" Amy's voice had risen an octave. "Sarah, honey, I know yesterday was traumatic, but you can't just— His name is James Cooper," Sarah interrupted, reaching back to squeeze James's hand. "He owns the ranch where my car broke down, and before you say anything else, yes, I know it sounds crazy, but I also know it's right. But you just met him. After what happened with Richard, how can you—" "Because he's real, Amy." Sarah's voice softened. "Because in 2 days, he's shown me more genuine care and understanding than Richard did in 2 years. Because sometimes you just know." James stepped closer to the phone. "Ms. Henderson," he said, his deep voice carrying the same quiet confidence he used to calm nervous horses. "I understand your concern for your sister, but I promise you, my intentions are honorable, and my love for her is genuine." There was another pause. Then Amy's voice came back, more measured. "You sound older than I expected." Sarah couldn't help but laugh. "He is. We both are. Old enough to know what we want, young enough to be brave enough to take it." "Mom's going to have a fit," Amy warned, but there was a note of acceptance creeping into her voice. "And the board members will adapt," Sarah said firmly. "I can run Henderson Publishing from anywhere with an internet connection, and Montana has plenty of stories that need telling." As if on cue, Thunder's whinny floated in through the open window, followed by the distant lowing of cattle. The sounds of her new life, Sarah thought, already as familiar as her own heartbeat. "Well," Amy said finally, "at least tell me you're happy. Really happy." Sarah looked at James, at the way the morning light caught the silver in his hair, at the quiet strength in his eyes. "Happier than I've ever been." "Then I guess I better start looking at flights to Montana." Amy's voice had softened, though I have to say, this is going to make one hell of a story at Henderson Publishing's next author conference. After they hung up, Sarah leaned back against James's chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "One down," she said. "About 100 to go." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "We have time. Though I should probably call my sister Jenny. She's been managing the ranch's finances from Bozeman, and she'll need to know she's getting a new partner." Sarah turned in his arms. "You're sure about that? About making me part of everything?" "Sarah," he said seriously, "when I offered you my heart and this land, I meant all of it. The good years and the dry ones, the easy decisions and the hard ones. You're not just marrying me, you're becoming part of this place, this life." She reached up to touch his face, feeling the slight roughness of his morning stubble. "I love you, James Cooper, and I love that you understand that some things are worth more than time." He captured her hand, pressing a kiss to the ring that already looked as if it had always belonged there. "Speaking of time," he said with a smile, "I believe we have about 20 more phone calls to make." Sarah glanced at her phone, then deliberately set it aside. "They can wait a little longer." She pulled him toward the porch. "Right now, I just want to sit on that swing with you and watch the morning unfold." The phone lay forgotten on the kitchen counter, its screen occasionally lighting up with new messages from a world that would have to adjust to their happiness. Outside, the ranch went about its morning routine. horses nickering, cattle grazing, meadowlarks singing their ancient songs, and on the porch swing, two people who had found each other against all odds held hands and watched their future take shape against the vast Montana sky. Late afternoon found them at James's desk in his study, the ranch deeds spread before them like a map of their future. The afternoon sun slanted through the window, illuminating the document's formal language and the generations of Cooper signatures. At the bottom, James had pulled it from his father's old safe, along with other papers that would need updating. "My great-grandfather's original homestead claim is in here somewhere," he said, carefully sorting through the documents. 5,000 acres then, same as now. Every Cooper since has added their mark to it, building something that would last. Sarah ran her finger along the deed's edge, feeling the weight of history in the paper. "And now we'll add ours." "Together?" James agreed, pulling out a newer document. "I had my lawyer draw this up after Rebecca passed. Joint ownership papers. Never thought I'd be using them again, but—" He trailed off, watching her face. "Unless you'd rather keep things separate." "I know you have your publishing house to think about." Sarah shook her head, her decision already made. "Henderson Publishing is doing well enough to run itself with remote oversight. I've been moving toward that anyway. Grooming Rebecca—" She stopped, laughing softly. "My assistant Rebecca, well, she's ready for more responsibility." James reached for her hand, understanding the complexities they were navigating. "You've built something remarkable there. I don't want you to feel like you have to choose." "I'm not choosing between two lives," she said firmly. "I'm building one life that encompasses both. The ranch can be my base of operations. We already do most things digitally anyway." She smiled, squeezing his hand. "Besides, think of the stories here waiting to be told. Montana's literary scene is growing. Maybe it's time Henderson Publishing had a Western division." His eyes crinkled with pleasure at her enthusiasm. "There's plenty of room in the study for your office, or we could convert the old tack room. It has those big windows you liked." They spent the next hour sketching plans, their different worlds, merging on paper. Sarah's publishing experience melded with James's ranch management, creating something new and exciting. They talked about renovating the ranch's guest house for visiting authors, about writing retreats under Montana skies, about combining their different strengths into something stronger than either had alone. "We'll need to upgrade the internet," Sarah mused, making notes, "and maybe set up a proper video conferencing system for board meetings." "Already looked into that," James admitted, pulling out a satellite internet proposal. "Called them this. Morning while you were talking to Amy. Installation team can be here next week." Sarah paused in her note-taking, touched by this evidence of his commitment to her work. "You're sure about all this? About having your quiet ranch invaded by literary types and publishing meetings?" James leaned back in his chair, considering. "You know why I love this land?" He gestured toward the window, where the late afternoon sun was painting the hills in shades of gold. "Because it's always changing. Every season brings something new, but the heart of it stays the same." He turned back to her. "Change doesn't frighten me, Sarah. Not when it means growth." She stood and walked to the window, looking out over what would soon be partly hers. Thunder and Scout grazed together in the near pasture, while Martha supervised from her spot under an old oak tree. The scene was already familiar, already home. "I used to think success meant having everything under control," she said softly. "Perfect apartment, perfect schedule, perfect life. But here," she turned back to James, "here I'm learning that real success is being true to yourself, even when it means coloring outside the lines." He joined her at the window, wrapping his arms around her from behind. The deed lay on the desk behind them, waiting for their signatures, their commitment, their future. But for now, they simply stood together, watching their land, their home, prepare. "Every evening, my father used to say that a ranch is never really owned," James murmured against her hair. "It's just borrowed from future generations. We're caretakers, passing through." Sarah leaned back against him, feeling the solid strength of his chest. "Then let's be good caretakers of the land of our love, of this life we're building. The sun dipped lower, setting the windows of the study ablaze with golden light. The deed on the desk caught the light too, its official text transformed into something almost magical. Tomorrow they would sign it, making official what their hearts already knew. Tomorrow they would begin the practical work of merging two lives into one. But for now, they stood together at the window of what would be their shared study, watching their shared future unfold across the Montana landscape. The ranch deed behind them was more than a legal document. It was a promise, a foundation, a new chapter waiting to be written. The sun was setting when Mike from the gas station arrived, not just with a can of gas for Sarah's rental car, but with his wife Linda and a bottle of champagne. Word had traveled fast in the small community, as it tends to do in ranch country. The bottle was dusty and slightly crooked in its label, clearly saved for a special occasion. "Found this in the back of the store," Mike said, handing it to James with a knowing smile. "Figured if any moment deserved it, this was it." His weathered face creased with genuine pleasure. "Linda here nearly fell over when I told her the news." Linda, a soft-spoken woman with kind eyes, pulled Sarah into an unexpected hug. "Welcome to the family, dear. We've all been hoping James would find happiness again." More neighbors arrived as the evening deepened. The Hendersons, no relation to Sarah from the next ranch over, old Doc Wilson, who'd been the local veterinarian for 30 years, and Jenny, James's sister, who'd made the 2-hour drive from Bozeman as soon as she'd heard the news. The champagne bottle stood in the center of the kitchen island, its presence both celebratory and symbolic. James reached for it, then paused, looking at Sarah. "Would you like to do the honors?" She took the bottle, feeling its weight, not just of the champagne inside, but of the moment it represented. With a practiced twist and a soft pop, she opened it, the sound echoing through the warm kitchen like a starting gun for their new life. Jenny appeared at her elbow with an assortment of mismatched glasses she'd found in James's cupboards. "I think some of these were Mom's," she said, holding up a delicate champagne flute with a small chip in its base. "She'd be so happy about this, you know. Both of them would be." Sarah poured carefully, making sure everyone had a share, no matter how modest their glass. The golden liquid caught the light from the setting sun streaming through the kitchen windows, creating tiny prisms on the worn wooden countertop. "To James and Sarah," Mike proposed, raising his glass. "Proof that sometimes the best breakdowns lead to breakthroughs." Laughter and agreement rippled through the small gathering. Linda wiped a tear from her eye, and Doc Wilson cleared his throat gruffly before adding, "And to Rebecca, who'd be the first to celebrate this moment." James's arm tightened around Sarah's waist at the mention of his late wife. Not in grief, but in gratitude. Sarah leaned into him, understanding that love didn't divide itself, it multiplied, making room for both memory and new beginnings. Jenny raised her glass next. "To my new sister," she said, her eyes twinkling, "who somehow managed to do what none of us could, get my stubborn brother to upgrade his internet." More laughter, and Sarah felt the last bit of tension she didn't know she was carrying melt away. These people, with their honest faces and warm hearts, were accepting her not as an outsider or a city publisher, but as someone who loved one of their own. The conversation flowed as naturally as the champagne, stories and laughter mingling in the gathering darkness. Martha made her rounds, accepting pets and treats from everyone, while through the window they could see Thunder and Scout in their paddock, silhouetted against the sunset sky. "You know," Linda said quietly to Sarah during a lull in the conversation, "I haven't seen James smile like this since before Rebecca got sick. You've brought something back to life here, something more than just romance." Sarah watched as James talked with Mike and Doc Wilson, his face animated as they discussed the upcoming cattle drive. He caught her looking and smiled, a private smile that seemed to light up the room. "It's mutual," she told Linda. "He's helped me remember who I am beneath all the titles and expectations." The champagne bottle stood empty now on the counter, its work done. But its presence had transformed the kitchen into something more than just a room. It had become a place where two lives had officially begun their merger, witnessed and blessed by the community that would help support them. As the evening drew to a close and their impromptu guests began to leave, each offering congratulations and hugs, Sarah found herself standing in the doorway with James, watching taillights disappear down the long driveway. The empty champagne bottle caught the last light of day, throwing golden reflections across the kitchen walls like promises of bright tomorrows. Dawn painted the kitchen in familiar shades of gold as Sarah and James moved around each other in a dance that felt centuries old despite its newness. The shared breakfast table between them held twin mugs of coffee, 2 plates with half-eaten toast, and the comfortable silence of people who didn't need words to communicate. James had risen early for his morning ranch duties, but instead of eating his usual hurried breakfast alone, he'd waited. Sarah had joined him shortly after, wearing his borrowed flannel and looking as if she'd always belonged in this kitchen, in this moment, in this life. "The realtor in Boston called," she said, adding a touch of honey to her coffee. "They'll handle the apartment sale remotely. Everything else can be shipped out here." She paused, stirring thoughtfully. "It's strange. I spent 15 years filling that place with carefully chosen things, but sitting here now, I can hardly remember what half of them look like." James reached across the table, his hand covering hers. "Sometimes the things that matter most are the ones you never planned for." The breakfast table between them, a solid oak piece that had served 3 generations of Coopers, seemed to agree, its worn surface holding countless stories of mornings, just like this one. A shaft of sunlight fell across its center, highlighting the rings left by countless coffee cups, each mark a testament to shared moments and quiet conversations. "Jenny called while you were out checking the fence line," Sarah continued. "She's already drawn up the preliminary paperwork for adding me to the ranch accounts." She smiled. "I think she's relieved to have someone else to share the bookkeeping with. More relieved to have someone else to gang up on me with during budget discussions, I expect," James chuckled. "She's been trying to modernize our tracking systems for years." About that, Sarah pulled out her tablet, which looked strangely at home next to the old percolator. "I've been looking at some ranch management software. There's one that could integrate with the publishing house's accounting system." James listened as she outlined her ideas, his face soft with admiration. Here was a woman who could run a major publishing house, yet was equally excited about streamlining cattle records and fence maintenance schedules, who looked as natural with her tablet as she had on horseback yesterday. Martha padded into the kitchen, settling between them with a contented sigh. Through the window they could see Thunder and Scout in the morning mist, 2 shadows moving in perfect sync across the pasture. "I should head into town," James said eventually, reluctance clear in his voice. "Need to pick up supplies, and Doc Wilson mentioned some paperwork he wants me to sign about the spring cattle drive." Sarah stood, gathering their breakfast dishes. "I'll come with you. I'd like to see more of the place that's going to be my home." She said the last word with a certainty that made James's heart swell. They cleaned up together, the mundane task, made special by its shared nature. The breakfast table was wiped clean, but its surface still held the warmth of their coffee cups, the echo of their conversation, the promise of countless mornings to come. "You know," James said as they prepared to leave, watching Sarah pull on her boots like she'd been doing it all her life, "my mother used to say that love isn't in the grand gestures. It's in knowing how someone takes their coffee, in the quiet. Moments before dawn, in the rhythm of 2 people moving through a morning together." Sarah paused at the door, taking in the scene one more time, their shared breakfast table, the coffee cups in the sink, Martha curled up in her spot by the window. Such simple things, yet somehow containing everything that mattered. "Your mother was a wise woman," she said softly. "Though I think love is also in the way a stranger offers coffee to a stranded traveler, in the courage to trust what your heart knows before your mind catches up, in the willingness to let life surprise you. James pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. In that case, I'd say we've got all our bases covered. They stepped out into the morning together, leaving the breakfast table to bask in the sunlight streaming through the window. Its scarred and beautiful surface had witnessed its share of beginnings and endings, of solitary meals and crowded gatherings. Now it stood ready to witness this new chapter, this blending of two lives into something richer than either had been alone. Late afternoon sun streamed through the study windows as Sarah stood holding the key ring James had just placed in her palm. 3 keys gleamed against the worn leather fob, one for the main house, one for the ranch gates, and one for the tack room that would become her new office. But it wasn't just keys she was holding, it was the physical embodiment of belonging, of home, of choice. "Welcome home," James said softly, his voice carrying all the weight of what these keys represented. Officially, Sarah ran her thumb over the smooth metal, feeling the ridges and grooves that would soon become as familiar as her own heartbeat. The leather fob bore the Cooper Ranch brand, worn smooth by generations of hands. Now it would know her touch too. "My mother called again," she said, still looking at the keys. "She wanted to know if I was absolutely certain about throwing away my life in Boston." A small smile played at her lips. "I told her I wasn't throwing anything away. I'm just finally brave enough to reach for what I really want." James moved to stand behind her, both of them looking out the study window at the land that was now theirs to share. The late afternoon light painted everything in shades of gold and promise. Thunder and Scout grazed peacefully in the near pasture, while Martha herded a few wandering cattle back toward their proper field. "You know," Sarah continued, "for years I thought success meant having the corner office, the right address, the perfect social circle. I spent so much time editing other people's stories that I forgot to live my own." She turned to face him, the keys warm now in her palm. "But here I can still be the publisher I love being, still work with authors, and shape stories. I'll just be doing it somewhere real, somewhere that matters." James touched the leather fob gently. "My grandfather had these made when he married my grandmother. Said a ranch wife needed her own keys because she wasn't just moving in, she was becoming part of the ranch's heart." Sarah closed her fingers around the keys, feeling their weight. "Your grandfather was a wise man. He also said that love is like ranching. It takes work, trust, and the courage to weather whatever storms come your way." James's eyes crinkled at the corners, though I don't think he ever anticipated his grandson falling in love with a publishing executive from Boston. "Life does have a way of surprising us," Sarah agreed, moving to the desk where her laptop sat, next to James's leather-bound ranch ledger. The contrast should have seemed stark, but somehow it looked right, the blending of their two worlds. She slipped the key ring into her pocket, where it settled as if it had always belonged there. The metal was warm against her leg, a constant reminder of this moment, this choice, this future. "I sent the last of the paperwork to my lawyer in Boston," she said. "The apartment's on the market. My assistant Rebecca is being promoted to managing director, and the board has approved my working remotely." She smiled, though I think they're still a bit shocked that their CEO is becoming a rancher's wife. "Ranch partner," James corrected gently. "This is as much your home now as mine." The keys in her pocket seemed to pulse with agreement. Outside, the sun was setting on another Montana day, painting the sky in colors no city sunset could match. Sarah thought about the life she'd planned versus the life she'd found, about how sometimes the best stories are the ones that write themselves. "Partner?" she repeated, savoring the word. She reached for James's hand, their fingers intertwining as naturally as their lives had. In everything, the keys in her pocket, the ranch brand on the leather fob, the dying sun painting their shed, study in shades of gold. All of it felt right, felt true, felt like the beginning of the story she'd always been meant to write. 1 month later, Sarah stood before the living room mirror, adjusting the simple gold band on her finger. No elaborate ceremony, no expensive dress this time, just a quiet gathering on the ranch at sunset. She wore a cream-colored sundress that caught the Montana breeze and wildflowers in her hair. Through the window she could see James, waiting by the old oak tree, handsome in his pressed ranch clothes, talking easily with the local judge. Their small group of witnesses, Amy, Jenny, and their closest neighbors, gathered in the golden light of evening. Thunder and Scout grazed nearby, wearing special halters for the occasion, while Martha supervised everything from her spot on the porch. The ranch spread out behind them like a painting, a testament to the truth that sometimes life's wrong turns lead you exactly where you're meant to be. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you.